David and Megan Roche. It's UTMB week, your first time in Chamonix.
It's the best week ever.
Thanks so much for having us. This is so cool. We're massive Freetrail fans, subscribe and everything. Absolutely just an honor to be here.
Yeah, well, likewise. And I've just been steamrolling through your guys' archive too and love every episode. And you've brought up so many interesting things recently, especially they're relevant to UTMB. And so I figured it would be great to get you to come on the show and add more of like a coaching perspective, but I'm sure there's a lot that we can talk about. But maybe first, what are the first impressions of your first UTMB?
Okay, we're obsessed.
Yeah, can we move here? That is like my impression. Can we raise an American baby here?
Yeah. Well, I think that it would officially be a French baby.
Yeah, at that point, yes.
Baguette is going to be his first word. It's going to be so great. We're always a little bit, we had actually never traveled internationally outside of when we have raced on world's teams together. And coming over here with this type of experience has just been eye-opening. And we absolutely adore the trails. They're so much different than even the elevation profiles indicate.
Yeah.
They're so fun. And so, yes, we're probably going to be over here a lot.
I was going to say, I feel like my heart and soul belong in Chamonix and my quads now officially too. Yeah. And we've been doing a lot of running ourselves, and it's like, it makes me so excited for our athletes out there.
Yeah. And so you guys have 12 athletes competing this weekend. And so that provided a valuable excuse to bring the whole family over here. And we should say
that shit.
Yeah, we should say Harmony is just taking Leo for a little walk, so you guys could sit down and chat for a little bit. So maybe let's start there. You know, the whole parenting thing, we're going through it together. What's Leo's birthday? It must be coming up, right?
October 28th.
Okay, so he's 10 months, I guess.
Yeah.
So 10 months, almost exactly. Rose just turned 1. How was the first 10 months been of this new journey?
It's, I'm always bad with strength training, and I'm just getting those lifting muscles going. So that's my main thing. I'm focused on the training. Megan's more focused on the parenting.
It's been, you spent from midnight to 3 a.m. making up nursery rhymes. So your parenting is very solid.
His dirty nursery rhymes as he was adjusting to the new time zone were quite good.
Yeah, no, it's been so much fun. And we've been following Rhodes too. And Rhodes and Leo had like a moment last night over pizza. And I've been waiting for that for 10 months.
Yeah.
So
and Megan's the best mom in the world. It's so fun to see her in action, and it inspires me to be a better person in all I do.
It just reminded me, I recall you posted a passport photo of Leo. I can't remember. Yeah. But we have to show you Rhodes' passport photo because it's absolutely hilarious.
I can't wait. That would be amazing.
So funny.
Well, we got the photo about a week ago. So this is very much an expedited trip.
Yeah.
So it's, we classified it as business travel.
Yeah. Until the very last second, we weren't sure we were going to get here. So now that we're here, it's like the ultimate exhale and get to take out some of our stress on the trails ourselves before the races.
Yeah. So maybe let's go back to Western States. I recall you posted that you guys had, was it 6 out of the top 15 runners
for women
women at Western States? So obviously another great year for you two there. And I eventually want to get around to a brilliant point that you made about people who are doing the Western States UTMB double, but maybe let's first just start there. Any reflections on the Western States this year? Because you've always talked a lot about heat training and sort of race management and things like that. And it seemed like the swap team really threaded the needle at Western States again this year.
I think one thing that's fascinating about the sport that was illustrated at Western States is that, especially for women, it's changing at the front with how people are racing. Going out so much faster and then being rewarded for going out faster. And what I'm curious to see this week as a coach and as a fan of the sport is how that changes the dynamics, not just in OCC and CCC, the races that are more commonly going out fast, but also UTMB with Courtney here. And everyone knowing that if you want to ride that wave, you can't let it pass you.
Yep.
And so I think we saw that at Western States where, Katie and Esther were able to race up from the back and have incredible days. But the top 2 had already, vanished by then, even though they had 2 of the historic days. So I'm very interested to see how that plays out. And similarly with men, people are going for it at the front.
It's almost like the Tour de France now, isn't it?
Oh,
like
it's wild.
if you lose contact, it's tough to bridge back up. It's almost like cycling.
Yeah, exactly.
It's crazy.
I think decisions have to be made early when you feel good that you might regret later. And so it's a risk reward calculus. Are you playing that for the elite athletes, is your peak going to be top 5, or are you playing for the win? Because those are 2 very different races. And I think it's been like that for men for a bit. And for women, with Courtney pushing the sport forward, who knows where it goes from here.
And I'm curious too about the Western States UTMB double, because historically that's been hard to pull off.
Yeah.
But we're seeing with our athletes, people are recovering really fast from
Yeah.
Western States
So
this
go
year.
into that. So I was listening to your podcast. It must have been 2 or 3 weeks ago now. And you brought up that you were noticing with your athletes that they were recovering more quickly from Western States. And so that you made the prediction that the Western States UTMB double athletes were going to probably be more successful. Corinne brought it to my attention also that there was one more week in between Western States and UTMB this year, which helps. So off the top of my head, I should have written this down. It's like Tom Evans, Courtney, Tyler, Esther, Leah, Taylor Nowlin, Jeff Colt. I think I'm forgetting one other person. Maybe Cody Lind was in there too. All of whom I think have a really good chance of pulling off the double.
Yeah.
Great athletes, obviously, but tell us, I mean, you're sort of the sports scientist, so tell us as kind of the physiology here.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And I feel like for us, for our athletes, we just saw like so much faster recovery rates across the board.
Starting in the first 2 days.
Oh yeah. And honestly, within the first few hours.
We
of
have
the
been in the
race.
hospital with athletes after Western States before, so we understand the carnage of particularly hot races. When you do that, it's impossible to stay hydrated. The kidney damage is a lot, but even if short of that, the fatigue, like the cellular level endocrine system damage that happens when you're pushing that hard in that high heat, can be really difficult. This year at Forest Hill, we were quite cold at times.
It was breezy.
I had goosebumps.
Right.
And yes, it was still a difficult day. It was still warm later, but the difference was huge. And so, for our athletes, usually we say, don't do the double.
Yeah.
History does not show it good. Even if an athlete succeeds at UTMB, usually the year after that, they suffer in different ways.
Or do the Western States CCC double, which I think is a little bit more doable.
Yeah.
But even that has some negative content. And then this year, like, well, this is unprecedented. So let's follow how you feel. And so probably mostly related to the temps out there. But I mean, as soon as the finish line, people were just already bright-eyed and bushy-tailed.
Yeah.
And I mean, for me, it's really exciting because Western States on a hot year is a very stressful experience. Western States on a cool year, just delightful. You get to celebrate with athletes. They actually recognize your face when they get to the finish line.
I was wearing a fleece on the track until like
It was
noon.
so cold.
It was crazy.
It was wild.
David, going back to what you just said earlier, I thought that was interesting about like determining what the goal is. Like, are you going for the win versus are you trying to podium or finish in the top 10? It is two very different races. And if you are going for the win, you really do have to take major risks, as we've seen here in the recent memory. Pau Capel going wire to wire. Obviously, Jim and Killian going head to head. Jim and Francois going head to head. Courtney going wire to wire. As you sort of coach athletes up, how do you encourage them to tune in to what their actual goal is to align the strategy appropriately?
Yeah, we always try to talk to them about separating results from the process that they want to have, the experience that they want to have out there. Because, if you go out there and race to win at a race like UTMB, I don't know if you're going to get around that mountain, or if you do, you have to have a different mindset than most athletes on the planet. You have to go out there and be pursuing a fulfilling experience that gives you what you want from the day. And so for some athletes, that's really testing the limits of what their capabilities are and accepting that it might raise the chances of a DNF. And that would be the type of race that goes for the win. But if an athlete tells us, like, I just want to go for some place or anything, we try to stop that conversation immediately, because that's not going to be what makes you succeed at UTMB. It is such a hard race. There are so many low points. As Courtney talks about, the pain cave at UTMB becomes the experience in the second half for large portions of the race. Yeah. You don't get through the pain cave and the hopelessness that you can feel sometimes in ultras if you're not guided at least a little bit by love and fulfillment. So we always try to ground athletes in that.
And I think embracing the imperfections too, because at Western States, you can have a perfect race. It's so many hundreds, you can have a perfect race. And at UTMB, it's like, you have to embrace the imperfections, because even Katie Scheid last year struggled, came back. And I think we're talking to our athletes a lot like that, embrace the imperfections. And also, like, I think sometimes like the mile by mile, like split granularity, it's like, be flexible out there, and like athletes have it within them, and just emphasizing that to them.
Yeah. You guys have always been, I think, big proponents of taking a long-term approach and a sustainable orientation to training. We bumped into each other last night in the village, and I told you that we were just talking about you guys with Drew Holman, who was sitting on that couch yesterday afternoon. And I figured it'd be fun to talk a little bit about maybe him specifically, to the extent you guys feel comfortable. Obviously, I don't think he would be, I don't think he'd be averse to that, but he's such an impressive guy. And he, I think, refreshingly doesn't train like a complete psychopath. And I want to get around to also talking about another point you guys made on the podcast about just observing people training here and potentially going overboard. And Drew, who's always taken a sustainable long-term approach, but he's unquestionably one of the best, finishing 5th at the World Championships, et cetera. So really what I'd like to drill down on with Drew is just kind of using him as an example to this long-term approach and what you can do with more moderate training.
Well, we can talk about Drew because Drew is like a recurring bit on our podcast at this point. I feel like
I could talk about Drew all day.
Yeah, he's a character in every single one of our podcasts.
With or without pants on.
Yes.
No, I mean, so I guess we met Drew back in 2017, probably around when you were running with him at SFRC around that time era. So many years ago now. And the coaching process started with the understanding that he was immensely talented. Like that was kind of a prerequisite for the training approach we used, that he was talented, busy, and might not have been motivated by the external things. Like he already started from the process, internal drive, parts of this sport. Like he does it for the right reasons, the reasons that we'd like to see. And so our thinking was, if you're just thinking long-term and the athlete is totally bought in like Drew, then the main goal is to improve their running economy so that, you know, the same paces take less effort over time, which means speed has to stay at the forefront and aerobic development, like low level aerobic development. And you don't want to break down that athlete much because what Drew could achieve in 10 years was basically unthinkable. And you could kind of see that trajectory very early on with things like we do a fatigue resistance test with athletes, and he measured at the very, very top back before he was showing that. And when we saw that, we're like, oh, that's weird.
Is that like a repeat sprint type test or?
No, so it's essentially a tempo uphill done at the end of a longer session where they've already gone through a few thousand kilojoules of energy.
So Drew has very, very little lag on climbs. So like if he went out and did a 10-mile run, his final climb, fresh and fatigued, would be very similar.
Wow.
Basically no fade. And sometimes actually improvement, which he flips the curve. It's freakish, but also interesting. It's one of the reasons we track fatigue resistance. We can improve that metric, but there are probably some predispositions to it. And so when you see that, you're like, oh, this is a great responsibility. And so the idea is build up to races, give them the tools, hopefully to prepare for those, but not burn them out and break them down, because every one of these races is a breakdown experience, and let alone the training days. So I'm just getting back from a run here that was 12 miles and 4,500 feet a gain. Yeah. Like if I went out and did 18 miles, I would be so broken down here. And I think sometimes people distill training down just into numbers, and the impressive numbers, or even the like kind of big numbers that we see all the time. If we were measuring that stuff on the cellular level, what we'd see is essentially a toxic waste dump. And Megan's research has shown me that. And as a result, it's like, okay, we try to de-emphasize a little bit accumulation of numbers, think about the stimulus, the cellular level health, and make sure that, that health element and then fun stay at the forefront in developing speed and aerobic systems.
Well, I feel like also too, that physical health component interacts with mental health so much in keeping athletes stoke going. Like this is a sport athletes can do for a really long time. And it's not like basketball or football where at age 35, you're reaching your limits. And here we have
maybe
athletes.
Even earlier in those sports, like, if you're an NFL running back and your career's over at 27, maybe it makes sense to just like do whatever it takes to be as great as you can for that time. But it's like, Drew he's in this for life.
Ahead of him. Yeah.
Like I might not be coaching Drew when he's 65, but I guarantee he's going to be running up Mount Sanitas in Boulder. And like, I don't want to fuck that up. Yeah. Like, that's a great responsibility of any coach.
Yeah.
One of the things that I think makes you guys special is exactly this, is like the mix between IQ and EQ. Like you guys are both clearly very smart. You're both very clearly very like scientifically oriented, but you do ground everything in sort of this, the word that comes to mind is touchy-feely, but that's maybe not the right thing.
No, I think we accept that. Like it's art. Yeah. I mean, as much as we want coaching or training or basically anything in, exercise physiology to be science, like each individual data point is so different that you have to understand the person, even if you didn't care. Because this is a study that just came out talking about this, that if you dig down into all of these studies that say this intervention causes this, actually what you see is if you can isolate an individual data point, you get immensely different changes. Like there's almost no intervention that causes a uniform type of shift, like a uniform rightward shift. And so understanding that when you incorporate all these variables, that every single person varies just so much, means that like you have to know the person, hopefully care about the person, especially over long time horizons where people change so much.
And we study the science so much. Like a big part of our relationship is just sending like journal articles to each other over text message. It's probably like the primary way we communicate.
It's our sexting.
Yeah, for sure. But the more that I feel like we dive into that science, it's like, oh no, this is an art. Like the more entrenched I become in science every single year, it's like, it's so much more art than it is science. And I think we take that into our coaching.
Yeah. And I mean, I always like Megan is the smartest person I've ever met, MD, PhD, studies this stuff. And also just has a processor that's like out of this world.
But I think it's what makes you guys different and special, because there's like a lot of people who are PhD level processors can't really like connect on the human level, at least in the way that it seems like you guys really are able to with your athletes, having not been coached by you. I know many of your athletes, and what everybody loves about you is that you do bring that sort of personal energy and relationship to it, and you help them see the best in themselves. So I don't know if there's anything you want to say about just like balancing the following the data, following the sports science, but also like understanding that each person is a N of one.
Well, I think I can assure you we're very, very awkward. So I think we definitely do fit some of the standard scientific front. Hopefully awkward and funny at the same time, but definitely awkward.
Yeah, we have the being bad at parties thing down.
Oh yeah,
science.
that
we have down to a science.
No, but I think coaching actually for me as a scientist, like coaching is extremely helpful, because I think sometimes you get so in one lane and there is like a big application of science. And I feel like coaching drives the scientific process and science drives the coaching. And there's a really nice overlap between the two. And I think that's where like the art component comes in. And for me, that's been so helpful.
Yeah. And when you think about long-term, what is this? I think when we distill things down to numbers, sometimes we lose sight of the individual, like the bones and gristle of it.
And the individual data points. Yeah.
And so think about like a 5 by 3 minute hill workout or something like that. How much of that is in the body and how much of that is in the brain? So the body definitely determines the range of probabilities that an athlete can have. But if we can channel like belief as an attribute that we're trying to foster, then you might just push to the top end of that range of probabilities every day. And if you do that and you're just like 1% better and 1% better, eventually what you're adapting to is not just the physical stimulus, it's the emotional one.
Yeah.
And it becomes the bones and gristle of it. So, in doing that, like, the touchy-feely stuff is all about, one, trying to just be truly loving and caring about athletes in their whole lives. But two, even if we didn't care about any of that, just trying to make athletes crush bitches on races like this.
And I think we are the bones and gristles too, because we're athletes. And I think we try to do the training that we give athletes. Like I want to do 5 by 3 minute hill efforts. And it's like understanding deeply what athletes are going through from our personal perspective is really helpful.
My legs hurt so bad right now.
You're like, I get it.
There's a lot of vert here.
So bringing it back to UTMB, again, I mentioned a second ago that you guys were talking about on your show about how sometimes you can observe people who come over here and maybe get a little overboard, and that doesn't necessarily fit with the long-term health orientation that you have. As coaches, when you have athletes who are coming over here with big goals, how do you encourage them to, be moderate in their approach, or maybe just like have that belief that would, not otherwise tempt them to go out into the mountains for many hours a day?
It's hard. I think acknowledging that it's hard. I turn on Strava in the morning at like 6 a.m. Colorado time, and it's just like Chamonix, 40-mile run, 50-mile run. So it's definitely overwhelming. I think we're telling athletes like staying a little bit out of town goes a long ways. I think disconnecting from social media, and then just like getting down to the foundation of why we're doing this. And I feel like that's not Strava files. It's not, numbers, it's not data, it's being out on these freaking incredible trails and like being here to see it. It's like, oh, be a soul runner too. And that's definitely what we're talking to our athletes about.
And also we're rooting for everybody. Like we tell athletes, it's like when you're out there racing or when you're out there training or when you look at Strava, every time you open it, hope that they do great. That lifts everybody up and also takes away some of the comparison element, which is what I think truly is what crushes people in this sport. The quest for self-improvement or whatever, I don't know if that's what's motivating people to do the most crazy training. I think often they're grounding it in things that like some insecurities related that we all feel related to maybe the competitive aspects of the sport or even the competitive aspects of training in the sport. And so I think rooting for others and also just digging down and trying to understand that what works for other people isn't necessarily going to work for you. Trust the process. Yeah. Trust but verify. So trust the process. Let's make sure it's working. But if you stick with it, like we promise it'll work. Like,
and UTMB is UTMB because there's 25 people on the starting line who can win and like embrace it. That's what makes this place magical. And so that's what we've been telling athletes too, is like, it makes us all better in the end. So just lean into it.
So you were also talking about sort of a prediction that you thought American athletes would perform well here over the course of
#biased.
Maybe the next decade or next generation. And you had a brilliant analogy of European basketball players. So please share that for those who haven't heard your podcast.
So back in the day, I just read Showtime, the book about the 1980s Lakers. And when they drafted Vlade Divac, who was this big European center, there's this stereotype that European players are just soft and slow, but especially soft. And that stuck for a long time, even as really good European players came over. It wasn't until the early 2000s with Dirk Nowitzki, and then more recently with like Nikola Jokic, who's won multiple MVPs, Giannis Antetokounmpo, who's won multiple MVPs, that stereotype has been flipped on its head. And if anything, U.S. basketball has been informed by the way Europeans play, the way they spread the floor, the way they shoot corner threes and things like that. Similarly, I think, I don't know if you agree, she's letting me go. Yeah. She's deferring.
Let him cook. Let him cook.
That U.S. runners have often been portrayed as soft over here. Yeah. And yeah, I get that some men haven't won UTMB yet. And I get that we might be a little bit later coming over here in force. But I think it's all about to change in a really major way.
And who's going to do it? Who's going to be the American man to do it?
No, I don't want to get into specific prognostications. This is more of a general that I can't be held accountable for. But, going out there and running those trails, it's like, oh man, people have no idea how fast Americans are. Yeah. Like, and even seeing the times, I'm like, yeah, there's amazing runners here. And, they are absolutely incredible at the front, but in America, these athletes are insanely good too. Yeah.
Also in the US, these trails are at really high altitude. Like for us, we see this type of terrain at like 10,000, 12,000 feet. And there's a lot more oxygen here on this type of terrain.
So I think that, we already have had the Dirk Nowitzkis and people like that. I think we're about to see the Jokic's, the people that start winning MVPs, come over here and, establish themselves over and over and over again in force across the board.
So, and who's Courtney as a basketball player?
Oh, I mean, yeah, it's a good point. Yeah. Courtney's the second coming of like Michael Jordan.
Michael Jordan mixed with LeBron James.
Yeah, exactly.
So maybe winding down here, what are the plans for the team swap this weekend? Will you guys be out on the course cheering on your athletes?
We were just talking about that. So we don't have a car and we have a baby. And so we will be out there.
Yeah.
Maybe
what we're going to do
through like magical forces. Yeah.
Chamonix has a lot of locals that have cars, and we're putting out feelers on our Patreon, and we're like, who wants to hang with us?
Actually, David is so good at spectating and crewing races because he usually runs places. So he'll just like appear in the bushes with all these like scratches and bruises. So
I'm the creeper in the bushes.
I'm waiting for you to run to Courmayeur. Just make it happen.
Oh yeah. All I can promise is that our athletes will see me in the most unexpected places. Whether Leo will be there, I'm unsure. But no, we can't wait. I mean, there's athletes that we coach that are just so primed for breakthroughs that are wild. But the crazy thing about this race is you just can't predict it. Yep. And so what we're hoping everybody does is just goes out there and has an experience that is memorable, because whether they win or finish last place or DNF, like, the memories are what you take with you. And like, if you look back 5 years, the race results, they all become blurred together and a little bit of dust in the wind. Yeah. And the memories are things that you take for the rest of your life.
So maybe final question then, something David and I had spoken about in a non-public forum is that you guys are also freaking great athletes. And maybe this is a better question for after race weekend, but after you get, pulled into the full UTMB vortex. But any curiosity about pinning a bib on?
Oh, I'm coming back for sure. Actually, the other night I was like, can I race ETC? And David was like, oh, you needed a medical record like 4 months ago for that. But I would love to do CCC or OCC. It's hard. We don't like racing our athletes. Yeah. So that part is challenging, but I want to come back. Yeah. Do you, David?
No. I want to take a lot of Strava segments and then maybe wind up at Western States one day soon.
Yeah. Well, guys, it's so fun to chit chat here in Chamonix ahead of the biggest race of the season. I hope your athletes all perform well, and I hope somebody gives you a ride around the mountain.
Thank you.
If anyone hears this and wants us to join you,
Want some company, let us know.
we don't really provide anything and we smell quite bad, but there'll be good vibes.
You'll have a baby with you.
Yeah.
But seriously, thank you for everything you guys do for sport. Like we talk about Freetrail all the time in our house, and like you're changing trails, trail culture, trail life.
And I don't know exactly where this is going to be, but anyone that hears this, give a little bit of extra money to Freetrail.
Right.
Up your tier. Like seriously, if 25 people up their tier, that'll make a huge difference for Freetrail.
Our conversation always is like, how can we support Freetrail? It's a hard business model, and we're like, we want to help you out.
Well, thank you guys so much for what you do as well, and we appreciate the support.
Huzzah!
Yeah. Woohoo!